The Roar in the Dark. May 10th, 1940. The sky over London was gray, as if mourning the peace already lost. Neville Chamberlain stepped down, and the weight of the nation shifted onto the shoulders of a man once dismissed as reckless, Winston Churchill. He entered Downing Street not with celebration, but with solemn urgency. Across Europe, Hitler's army rolled forward like thunder. Poland had fallen. France was crumbling. And Britain, small, isolated, unprepared, was next. The war had come. Now the lion would roar. In the war rooms beneath Whitehall, maps covered the walls, colored pens marking tragedy and resistance. Churchill stood surrounded by generals, advisors, and uncertainty. His voice, deep and deliberate, cut through fear. "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall never surrender." That speech, broadcast to a trembling nation, became more than words. It became armor. In Churchill, the British people saw defiance made flesh. He didn't offer illusions. He offered grit, unity, and something even rarer, hope in hellish times. But behind the speeches was a man burdened by doubt. He hardly slept. Nights were spent pacing dark corridors, cigar smoke trailing behind him like worry. He feared invasion. He feared betrayal. Most of all, he feared failing those who had trusted him when it mattered most. By day, he walked through bombed-out streets, comforting mothers who held nothing but ashes. Children reached for him, not as a politician, but as a symbol that the world hadn't ended yet. He cried with them, but never in public. The lion showed teeth, never tears. In meetings with Roosevelt, he lobbied desperately for American aid. "Give us the tools," he pleaded, "and we will finish the job." He knew Britain could not survive alone. And still, he stood alone until America finally joined the fight. His speeches were weapons. His resolve, steel. But Churchill was not infallible. He clashed with generals, made enemies within his own cabinet, and gambled on bold, sometimes risky strategies. Yet he pressed forward, driven by a singular truth. Surrender was not survival. It was extinction. The tide began to turn, from the beaches of Dunkirk to the deserts of North Africa, and finally to the skies over Berlin. Churchill's Britain endured. He became more than a prime minister. He became a myth, a voice that echoed through shattered windows and down into the bunkers. In 1945, after 6 years of war, Nazi Germany fell. Churchill, once scorned, now stood in Parliament a victor. The same halls that once jeered him now erupted in thunderous applause. And yet victory came with a strange silence. As the nation celebrated, Churchill sat alone in his office, the cheers muffled by thick walls. He looked at a photograph of fallen soldiers, then to the window. Outside, London was still standing. He whispered, not to the nation, but to himself, "The monster is dead, but the world will never be the same." The silence after the thunder. July 1945. The war was over. Flags waved. Bells rang. But when Britain voted, it turned its back on the man who had led them through the fire. Winston Churchill, the roaring lion, was no longer prime minister. He received the news quietly, seated with Clementine in their country home. For a long time, he didn't speak. The nation he had fought to save had chosen peace, but not him to lead it. It was a strange wound, deeper than defeat. He had delivered victory, only to be discarded in its shadow. But Churchill did not curse the people. "That's democracy," he said, forcing a smile. "It can be ungrateful sometimes." Still, a flicker of pain lingered in his eyes. A man whose life had been built for struggle now found himself surrounded by stillness. And yet, he didn't stop. In the years that followed, Churchill became a voice of warning again. As Europe rebuilt, he spoke of a new threat, an iron curtain descending across the continent. His words rang through halls that had once ignored him. The Cold War had begun, and again, Churchill's vision peered beyond the present. In 1951, the people brought him back. Older, slower, but still fierce, Churchill returned to Downing Street. His second term was quieter, shaped more by diplomacy than drama. He sought peace, not glory. He traveled, met with world leaders, and urged unity. But time, at last, was catching up with him. By 1955, his body had grown tired. The fire inside him dimmed, but it had never gone out. He resigned once more, this time by choice, leaving the stage with grace. He spent his final years painting, writing, and reflecting in silence. And in January 1965, the silence became final. Winston Churchill died at the age of 90. His funeral was watched by millions. Boats lined the Thames. Soldiers wept. Foreign leaders stood shoulder to shoulder in solemn tribute. The lion had passed, but the roar still echoed. His legacy is complicated. He was flawed, sometimes arrogant, sometimes blind to the pain of others. He made enemies. He made mistakes. But he also held a broken world together when it was falling apart. He taught that words can be weapons. That conviction can be louder than fear. That one voice, even when doubted, can change the course of history. And perhaps most of all, he proved that strength is not always measured by victory, but by the refusal to surrender. The screen fades to black. A final whisper. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. Winston Churchill, a man of war, a voice of defiance, a soul forged in fire. The fire before the storm. The wind howled through the ancient stone corridors of Harrow School, where a frail boy sat beneath the glow of a dying lantern. Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill, 12 years old, clutched a worn book of military tales, his fingers ink-stained, his eyes wide with wonder. Outside, boys laughed and shouted in the courtyard, but Winston remained alone, an outsider even among the privileged. He wasn't strong, nor particularly clever by academic standards. His teachers scolded him for laziness. His reports were a parade of disappointment. But in that solitude, a quiet fire flickered, one not fed by approval, but by defiance. He read about Napoleon, Nelson, and the Duke of Marlborough, his own ancestor. They were giants. He was only a boy with a lisp and a longing. His father, Lord Randolph Churchill, a rising political star, barely acknowledged him. To Randolph, Winston was a burden, not a son. "He'll amount to nothing," he once muttered after glancing at a school report. Those words buried themselves deep, like a splinter that would never come out. His mother, the elegant and American Jenny Jerome, was distant in another way, beautiful and adored, yet emotionally out of reach. So Winston built a world of heroes in his mind. He would not beg for affection. He would earn it, through courage, through words. At 17, after narrowly passing the entrance to Sandhurst Military Academy, he wrote in his journal, "I have a dream of making my mark upon the world." The sentence was underlined 3 times. His first taste of danger came soon after. Cuba, 1895. Assigned as a war correspondent, Winston rode through the jungle under a blazing sun, bullets whistling past. He didn't flinch. Later, he would describe battle as exhilarating. To him, it wasn't the violence, it was the chance to be seen, to become part of history. Then came India, then Sudan. His dispatches were more than reporting. They were performances. Flowing with vivid imagery, they earned him attention. But it was during the Boer War in South Africa that destiny opened its doors. Captured during a scouting mission, imprisoned in a Pretoria camp, the world assumed he'd vanish into obscurity. Instead, Churchill escaped, scaling walls, evading patrols, surviving on sheer will. When he returned to British lines, newspapers across London hailed him a hero. The boy with the lisp had become a man with a voice. By 26, he had published 5 books and won a seat in Parliament. But beneath the rising applause was a quiet tension. His ambition burned brighter than ever, but so did the shadows of doubt. Could he truly lead? Or was he simply louder than the rest? The camera fades to black as Churchill stands before the Parliament building for the first time, a top hat in one hand, a folded speech in the other. A voiceover whispers. The world was changing. So was he. But before glory came fire, and before fire came loneliness. The making of a lion. London, 1904. Gas lamps flickered through misty rain as Winston Churchill crossed the floor of Parliament, switching sides from the Conservatives to the Liberals. The chamber buzzed with disbelief. To many, he was a traitor. To himself, he was a visionary. "I am not a weathercock," he declared. "I do not change with the wind. I change the wind." Still in his 30s, Churchill stood out, flamboyant, sharp-tongued, and unyielding. He devoured politics like a battlefield, eager to lead, hungry to be heard. As a liberal, he championed social reform, pensions, labor rights, public health. Yet he also faced fierce opposition. For every speech that stirred hearts, there was another that inflamed enemies. But his ambition was relentless. "Courage is rightly esteemed," he once said, "but in politics, it is often mistaken for madness." Perhaps he was right. Perhaps he didn't care. Then came the war. In 1911, at just 37, Churchill became First Lord of the Admiralty, the highest position in Britain's navy. The drums of World War I were distant, but growing louder. Churchill, ever the strategist, prepared the fleet for battle, foreseeing conflict with Germany before many dared admit it. Yet foresight would not spare him from failure. The year was 1915. The plan: strike at the Ottoman Empire through the Dardanelles, a swift naval invasion at Gallipoli. But the sea turned red. The beaches became graves. Tens of thousands died in mud and silence. The operation failed, catastrophically. Churchill was forced to resign. The lion cub who roared with certainty was now mute with shame. He retreated to the countryside with his young wife, Clementine, and their children. Days passed in silence. He began to paint landscapes, rivers, quiet, still lives. With each stroke, he buried his grief. But the war haunted him. He had cost men their lives. "I was finished," he wrote. "The lights had gone out of my soul." Yet Clementine refused to let the darkness consume him. "You are not done, Winston," she whispered one evening as he stood by a window, watching rain carve paths on glass. "You're just gathering strength." Gradually, he returned, first to the army, commanding a battalion in France, then back to Parliament. But the spotlight had moved on. He was now a cautionary tale. Critics mocked his voice, his drinking, his ego. "A relic," they said, "has been clinging to lost glory." But even in the shadows, Churchill kept writing, warning of a new danger rising in Europe. He called Hitler a threat, Nazi Germany a storm. Parliament scoffed. The public turned away. No one wanted to hear about war again. And yet, one man refused to be silent. The section ends as Churchill, older now, steps off a train in 1938, holding a newspaper with the headline, "Peace in Our Time." His eyes narrow, jaw clenched. He whispers to himself, "This is not peace. This is the beginning."